This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, a podcast devoted to changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. With your hosts, Jack and Linda Major and Ellen Bennett. Today's guest is Jennifer Collins. Jennifer Collins, author, is a retired professor and physical therapist whose professional career spanned 40 years. She held many titles during those years, but mom was the one that brought her the most joy. Her close-knit family was the center of her universe. Her debut novel, Comfort in the Wings, emerged from Jennifer's devastating experiences with the loss of several immediate family members, including 2 of her 3 children. Tragedy in her life brought an understanding that seemingly opposite feelings, joy and profound sadness, or gratitude and anger, can exist at the very same moment. Striving to articulate those emotions compelled her to bring a seldom heard voice into fiction. Supporting loved ones through chronic illness, substance use, mental health struggles, and sudden loss, Jennifer was struck by the toll that stigma and judgment take on people who are grieving. Her books delve into meaningful conversations about those issues without preaching or politicizing highly personal issues.
Welcome, listeners, to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, episode 140, Love That Does Not Die, with author Jennifer Collins. This podcast is made possible and inspired by 2 eating disorder nonprofits that could not be dearer to our hearts. The Emily Connection, formed in memory of Emily Major, and KMB for Answers, founded in memory of Katie Bennett, 2 exceptional young women who lost their lives to anorexia. Our special guest today is Jennifer Collins. She will be with us momentarily, but first I need to welcome my soulmate and my best friend, Jack Major, and our dear friend and fellow advocate, Ms. Ellen Bennett.
Well, as always, it's great to be here, and welcome to all our listeners. This is going to be a great discussion today.
Welcome, listeners. It's great to be here. The link for Jennifer Collins is www.wordsinthewingspress.com. And that link and links for the 3 of us are in the show notes. Check it out.
Okay, my quote for today is by the psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who labeled the 5 stages of grief. The reality is that you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal and you will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same. Nor should you be the same, nor would you want to be. I think that is a very profound quote. In 2022, Jack and I attended a book reading by Jennifer Collins introducing her first book, Comfort in the Wings. We spoke afterwards and have become friends. Through Jennifer's 3-book trilogy and her main character, Larissa, she spreads a message of inspiration and hope after loss. And today, you will learn more about Jennifer's personal journey, the catalyst for all that's come after, and the hope of spreading light through the darkest of times for others. There is no doubt that Jennifer has rebuilt her life after profound loss.
Welcome, Jennifer. I'm so glad that we took that drive down almost to Canandaigua and for your first book signing and met you, and so glad that we've become friends since. It's wonderful. Wonderful to have you here today.
Jennifer, it's great to have you here. Welcome. You have a beautiful way of weaving your words that really touch anyone who has the opportunity to read your books. They're just beautiful. So we look forward to this conversation.
Oh, you give me so many reasons to say thank you. Thank you for being here. And Jack, yes, I'm grateful as well that you made that adventure. As we've said many, many times, no coincidences.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Ellen, I'm happy to hear that you're enjoying the books.
Absolutely. They're beautiful. Highly recommended reads.
And your first book is an audiobook that you recorded at a very special recording studio.
Yes, it sure is. That I was saying when we walked in 2 years ago.
It's Rockbox. It's this studio.
We love Rockbox.
So, Jennifer, you were a physical therapist and professor and a loving mom blessed with 3 beautiful children, 2 sons and a daughter. Please tell us about your early life and your family. And then can you share with us the events that rocked your world and changed your life forever?
Yes, I sure can. My early life, as you said, both with my own parents and then with my children, was in most ways totally idyllic. When my oldest son was 2 years old, we built a house right next door to my parents. So I have these wonderful memories of looking out my window to see my dad playing with the kids, or my mom walking one of them out to the garden to pick special treats. Even after being divorced twice and being a single working mom, things were good. My son's teen years, of course, brought some challenges. And then my daughter, Abby, struggled for years with multiple health problems. Severe asthma that more often than not led to pneumonia. She had multiple food allergies, fibromyalgia. But I still feel like we were taking it in stride. The events that, as you said so well, rocked our world began in 2014. And my then 29-year-old son, Jason, drowned at Powder Mill Park while fishing. And if that wasn't enough, a little more than 3 years later, Abby dying of fentanyl poisoning at 20. Life changed for a whole lot of us. My brother once put it, and I never forget him saying this, we were having a really great ride till the wheels all started falling off. Then 2 years later, that sweet younger brother passed as well. These unexpected losses of people far too young brought me more pain than I could have ever imagined. And along the way, not minimizing it at all, both my parents passed as well. And to today, in spite of writing, I still really don't have the words for so much loss in so little time.
Oh, so sad.
The loss of, a parent is, at some point expected, and hopefully it's, when they're 80 or 90 or whatever. But the loss of children is just, as everybody says, it's the most devastating thing in one's life.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so sorry. When our children struggle, and there's so many children out there struggling today, and as parents, we all look back for signs of things that we missed and what we could have done, or how they may have fallen through the, it used to be cracks in our mental health care system, but now they're chasms in the mental health care system. And, you've said that all of our children experience health issues and unsolved mental health struggles that manifest in so many different ways. Everybody's journey is different. And so can you please expound on that and your experience?
Yes. I mentioned a list of Abby's health issues a few moments ago. What is also in that list were constant medical appointments, a lack of health professionals willing to take on a late teen with mental health issues, a myriad of medications, and the observation that her life was full of times that she just did not feel well. The steroids that it made possible for her to breathe also made her anxious and unable to sleep. So the constant adjusting of one type of medication with others to help her sleep created new problems. Then a psychologist who saw her claimed that anxiety in young girls was often a sign of ADHD. So she was put on yet another medication. And when she lost weight because her pediatrician ordered a gluten and dairy-free diet, that same psychologist decided she was overusing Adderall, which she'd prescribed for the ADHD. And those are just, the quick examples that came back to mind of my daughter rarely feeling well. And I now realize likely seeking other substances to find her own ways to cope with feeling lousy and a list of physical symptoms. She did struggle with opioid use, but when she died, it had been nearly a year since she stopped taking them. And though we'll never really understand how Jason passed, only 3 weeks before that, he had been prescribed Xanax because he was experiencing anxiety. He didn't look well to me the last time I'd seen him, puffy and pale, but an independent 29-year-old didn't want to hear that from Mom. The findings by the medical examiner think that maybe there was a possible cardiac event. And I know all of you have similar stories with your children. Stories of us trying to navigate a slippery slope that there's not much to hang on to.
That's a great way to put it.
And I actually, another one just came to me, a young man who was a friend of Abby's. I was driving the two of them in the car one day, and something came on the radio, and I said, I made a reference to mental health problems and, kids, and it's a tough time to be coping with things. And he addressed me and he said, yeah, you think we'd all be doing all this stupid stuff? We'd all be putting this stupid stuff into our bodies if we didn't have a mental health problem? Like, why else would we do this? Yeah. And it felt like a version of the old out of the mouths of babes. Mm-hmm. Here was the young man struggling and embarrassed about his struggle, but when that comment came out, it resonated with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then compounding that, we have an environment and a culture and language that is used to categorize people with substance use issues are often stigmatized and looked down on instead of looking at causes and issues around there. Same with eating disorders and all mental health issues.
Yeah, and when you do that, I think it just adds to that shame and the stigma for that person. Now they've got a label on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, I know that's a pet peeve of yours. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. Stigmatizing labels are a super hot button for me. As you mentioned in the introduction, my professional background as a physical therapist taught me very early on that labels for physical impairments were practically meaningless. There are just so many individual variations. Yes, someone is a wheelchair user, but what they can and cannot do is not described in that label. And those labels were hurtful and demeaning to the very people we were trying to help. I was trying to help as a physical therapist. I just don't feel like there's an awareness of these stigmatizing labels and the damage they can do in the kinds of problems we're discussing. And almost every term that is used blames the individual. Mm-hmm. There's an implication that they should just be strong enough to stop whatever it is. Just stop the opioids, stop binging, stop your negative thoughts and pull your bootstraps up and turn yourself around. These hurtful, disrespectful words just don't acknowledge that there's underlying health conditions contributing to what the world is seeing of that person.
You have a quote in your third book that pertains to this. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Not at all. In the third book that Ellen just mentioned, Bridges Between Our Hearts, a song has been written about the protagonist's daughter, who was a young woman who died of fentanyl poisoning. Early in the story, Larissa is hesitant, even fearful, that if that song came out and became popular, her daughter's story would be made public or even exploited. eventually, the song does catch on later in the book, and she's interviewed by a talk show host and attempts to explain her fear. She says, "I'm terrified of the mean-spirited, judgmental people in the world that seem to capture the public's attention and get the headlines. And when those people get a hold of a story of a young person whose life on this earth was over too soon, assumptions are made, judgments abound, and the person becomes less than. By that I mean, instead of the whole being more than the sum of its parts, the whole becomes less than its parts. All of the beautiful, endearing features that make up the whole person become forgotten. They're reduced to a cause of death. The circumstances of death replace the wonder of life." And I find that terrifying and despicable. And I will share the main character's struggle resembles my own. Abby's college roommate wrote a beautiful song about her and shared it with me. I was honored, but I was resistant to share it. I didn't want Abby to be reduced to another statistic. I wanted her to be remembered as the generous, witty, beach-loving fun seeker that Justine portrayed in the song, but other lines might have left her more stigmatized than honored.
That's a very, very hard thing to do. It's a very brave thing to do as a mom, is to be able to say those words out loud. You know, that my daughter struggled with X, Y, or Z. But it's hopeful for other people, because if we don't talk about these things, they just fester. And when we talk about it, it has that potential to help somebody else. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I, as I've always said, I hate statistics. I guess they need to be there, but you know, behind every statistic is a real person, and we all are doing our best through our foundations and our books to bring the faces to that statistic and try to bring more people out to tell their story. And, so that there's a face on the 20% mortality rate to anorexia nervosa and the fentanyl loss, the opioid losses and stuff. So, which is just people should not be afraid, should have the shame or the stigma to come out and tell the story of their wonderful, wonderful person that's been lost.
How can we do better with these losses? What do you think needs to change so that as a culture and a community, we embrace all of the parts and walk away from the things that really don't matter? We don't talk about the things that matter. We need to talk about. So what do you think? What should change so we can really look at the whole?
That could take a whole other podcast.
A few words of wisdom, some pearls to share with us.
Okay, I will try to be brief. I think there's at least a couple of directions that can take, and Linda hit on one, and you hit on it again, and that is the willingness to talk. I have certainly found that the more I share my story, Jason's story, Abby's story, and hear others, it opens other people up. People that I have never expected then share their story. I had over the winter, a grandma share with me the story of her daughter caring for their child and how she worried for both. But I would have never known that about that woman if she hadn't read the book and felt she could open up. So, maybe some tiny little bit of change can happen from the conversation. But I think what just rips at me and even angers me is that I don't think much has changed in the treatment world for substance use, especially for young people that fall in this between the pediatric and the young adult place in the trying to acquire a healthcare provider who is qualified in that age range. And just to make sure that I wasn't responding only from my own emotion about that, I looked it up, Jack, and here's a statistic that is really upsetting. And there's only 8,000 child psychiatrists in the U.S., and it's estimated that we need over 30,000. Average 8-week wait. If your child needs
Help.
Psychiatric care, what do you do for 8 weeks? And 70% of the counties in the country have none.
Oh, my God.
That's true.
So it's not my imagination that not much has changed in the almost 9 years since Abby passed. You know, it's, yes, there's some small improvements, but between that and then a complaint you and I have shared in other conversations before is health insurance driving care rather than there being the care component first and payment catching up.
Yeah.
Lots of barriers.
So many barriers.
Yeah, everybody looks at the cost of care. They don't look at the cost of not getting care. And
how much more that costs in the long run.
Yeah.
Ultimately lives, but monetarily, and it always comes down to money with insurance companies. But I think that they would spend less money on each person if they gave people the comprehensive care that they needed early on, especially our children.
Yeah, and you know, I look at the eating disorder statistics that you know, treatment helps, you know, gets 50% of people into recovery. Well, 50%. What about the other 50%?
Yeah.
You know? So and
that's only the ones that seek treatment.
That's right.
So it's really terrifying.
Right, because only 10 or 20% actually get treatment,
or that have a really strong advocate, or you know,
yeah.
and
Right.
so many of our young folks don't.
Yeah. One of our guests that's in an upcoming podcast said that we have great health care in this country if you can afford it.
Right.
Yeah, if you can afford it. Yeah.
But even then, access is hard.
Yeah.
Even then. Yeah. So.
Yeah, particularly in some categories of care.
Right,
Yeah.
where there's not enough physicians or psychiatrists or psychologists or therapists or
To some extent, I think it reaches back to all of us reaching out to people and connecting and really having those genuine those inquiries. How are you? What's going on? And really extending that to encourage communities that are more supportive and eliminate that stigma.
And we have to educate all our citizens better, because if there's more compassion in the community and there's more understanding in the community, then the shame and stigma cannot exist. And and people heal in their communities. They don't just heal because they went to a doctor, especially with a psychiatric illness. They heal because they have the right supports at the right time. And so much of that is outside of the medical community. It's in your living room, in the kitchen, at the coffee shop, at school, at college, you know. And I think it's also pretty evident now that communication skills among a lot of young people aren't the same, because, you know, people grow up with technology, which is wonderful and sometimes terrible at the same time. But, you know, our communication skills need to be improved so people can find their voice and ask for help and not be ashamed. And we just, the whole world is just changing so quickly, in some ways for the better. In a lot of ways, we really need to rethink things. So. Okay, so your novels are beautiful, all three of them, and they're all inspired by a love that will not die. Tell us the titles and why you began to write, the process, and a little bit more about Larissa, the protagonist.
So the titles were, if writing wasn't challenging enough, then trying to encapsulate it in some meaningful words, the titles were challenging. And while the books certainly chronicle grief, they're also hopeful. So how to solve that seeming dilemma with words. The titles unfolded one at a time. The first, Comfort in the Wings, captures the deep, gut-wrenching grief that comes over anyone who loses a loved one and struggles to find comfort anywhere. And its subtitle is Inspired by Love That Will Not Die. The second one, Wonders in the Waves, came from the recognition that water heals and that the waves of water are much like waves of grief. And so I had this subtitle I loved in the first book, and I was really pondering what to do about another subtitle, and said to a writing advisor, could I do the same subtitle? And she said, yeah, sure you can. And immediately I said, no, what I want to change is, the first one was Love That Will Not Die. And then I went to Love That Does Not Die. And to me, it was a shift, but an important one. I'll get to the third book title in a minute, because you also asked about the writing. I first tried to write nonfiction because many friends, even my counselor, urged me to write a survival guide. And I put survival in my notes here. I put survival guide in quotes. They just thought I'd been through so much. You can write about surviving. It just didn't really resonate with me. But they kept coaxing me, and I was fascinated by the idea of writing. After having about 20 chapter headings and playing with that, it dawned on me one day that while the guide concept just wasn't working for me, maybe I could try a fictional character based on my own experiences. And so, yes, then the main character, Larissa, tells the story from her perspective. The books are written in first person, the perspective of a mother who has experienced child loss. It soon became an outpouring of the wide-ranging gamut of feelings that I had experienced, from feeling totally alone and miserable to being grateful for the family and friends standing by me. And so by the time I was well into the first and then the second book, it became clear to me that Larissa was changing. She starts out barely surviving, then finds herself striving for new relationships while still honoring losses. So by the third, that title is Bridges Between Our Hearts. She's making new connections and trying to thrive while cherishing the bridges she's built with her loved ones who are no longer physically present. I've come to think of the books as another model of grieving, not to take away from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but and I say this model consists of surviving, striving, thriving, repeat, and not in any order.
Yeah.
And so I think that now, in retrospect, that's what the titles say to me.
Yeah, I love that because, I go back to Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages, and I said, there's no set pattern of what you go through. You just bounce back from one to another to another. Yeah, and
So everybody does grieve differently. Was the writing cathartic for you? I mean, and that's a big shift, but it's so much, in a way, it's so much more. It's personal, but writing a guide to something just doesn't seem as personal, even though you experienced something, it's what you need to do. It's not necessarily about you. So I think that there's wonderful ways to tell a story through nonfiction and through fiction, and I think you chose what was exactly right for you. Nothing against anybody else's guides, but your message is so heartfelt and important, and I think you found a wonderful way to express what you needed to express. So was it cathartic? Did you grow a lot through the writing?
Well, I really didn't start writing as something to help me or be creative. I guess as someone who's always had this helping personality, I truly thought it was a way to reach people who may have experienced the same feeling of being totally alone in losing a child. But yes, reflecting back now, I believe it has become very cathartic. And it's the whole process. It's taking the time to write it first, the rereading, the rewriting, explaining my points to editors, having book club conversations with people, and they've all served to help me see my own grief and reactions far more clearly.
And it honors your children.
Yeah.
You did this.
Yes.
Jason and Abby, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's a quote by this Dutch priest, and I always struggle with his name. It's Henry Nouwen. He's a professor and a theologist, which you used in your book, Comfort in the Wings. So can you read that quote and tell us why you chose that and why it spoke to you?
Yes, so that quote is, when we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives means the most to us, we often find it is those who, instead of giving advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender heart. I had to go back, Jack, and look up which chapter this was in. For the people who have not read the books, I found a quote to introduce each chapter in the book. So now there's over 100 of them.
Oh, that's great.
They're great quotes, too. All of them.
So in this chapter, Larissa is in the company of an old friend for the first time in many years. She asks the friend to stay the night because she doesn't want to be alone. She doesn't want to talk about her grief anymore either. And I am blessed to have several friends like this. The people who have stayed by my side to be present for my pain, but not expecting to take it away or solve a blessed thing. They didn't ever surround me with silly platitudes such as, she's in a better place, or he'd want you to be happy. I always wanted to scream, how do you know what he'd want? So this quote is an example of holding space for someone, allowing them to be who they are and feel whatever barrage of emotions washes over them. As is the case with many of the quotes and book passages, this one is a nod and a deep thanks to the kind of friend who stayed present when I was anything but pleasant to be around. I'm so grateful to them.
Yeah. I do have a question that's, how did the name Larissa?
Whatever year the movie Dr. Zhivago came out, I saw it twice in 1 week. I loved that movie. And her, while the shortened version of her name is what became popular, Lara, and Lara's theme, right at the end of the movie, they call her Larissa. Her full name is Larissa. And I always loved that name, and I kind of wanted to name Abby Larissa, but we settled on Abigail and Abby for another reason. So when I was trying to think of names, I thought, I've loved that name forever.
Oh, that's great.
Seemingly forever. So, yeah.
My girlfriend and I went to see Dr. Zhivago, and the film, there was a technical problem at the theater. So we got there and we left, and I never have seen Dr. Zhivago, so I'm going to have to.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, you need
Yes.
to watch that movie. It's so good.
And that was many, many moons ago.
Yeah.
But yes,
I think
I've
you
totally forgotten about
Need to
that.
come to my house and watch it with me, and I'll recite every line.
Well, grief certainly changes us in so many ways. And again, I have to just say that reading your books just resonate in so many ways. How has the way you looked at life changed?
Grief, I think, as weird as it might sound, has made me more compassionate, grateful, appreciative. I'd like to think I was always those things and had those qualities, but it seems to me as if now they're far more integral to my everyday existence. I often feel that I have to be appreciative and grateful because for some reason I don't understand, I've been given more time than a lot of people that I love and adore, and I feel that I'd be almost disrespectful to them if I wasn't just going for it. I also think I've really slowed down, although I have friends who would argue that. But and I think that slowing down has allowed me to be so observant of all kinds of beauty around me and really appreciate it and revel in it. The signs from my loved ones bring a whole lot of joy, and I think if I hadn't slowed down in some way, I might have missed something. And now I catch a lot of them.
The signs are powerful, and when you write about that in your book, it really is something, and it's a beautiful part of this journey that really, and I think part of the signs, the things that we see or we hear, or those moments, really help us with that gratitude and also help us with that understanding of there are things we will never understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are things we will never. And your writing was just so incredibly beautiful and captured so many feelings. And I think there are probably so many, many people out there who are walking this path with us.
Yeah. I had a sign on Father's Day. When Emily passed, a bluebird was always Blue jay. I'm sorry. Yeah.
But we consider anything blue.
Blue, exactly. And so I was walking the dogs down, and Emily had built a house just a few hundred yards down the street from us, and it's still there. It's occupied, obviously, by someone else. And she had these pine trees that were planted at the back of her yard. And as I'm walking the dogs, there's this bluebird sitting on top of the pine tree right behind Emily's house on Father's Day morning. So we still have our dog Duncan, who's 16 years old now. So as I walked by, I just said, "Hi, Emily. Thanks for greeting me for Father's Day." So there's so many people that see these signs every day and don't appreciate them. And
Well, there's never enough. You always want more, right? But sometimes there's dry spells and you don't see anything. But when you do, you certainly embellish it and treasure it even more. But there's never enough, right?
Absolutely. On Jason's birthday last year, I was sitting on my deck with two friends, and all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't looking, and then I looked up, and the clouds had pulled apart, leaving a heart-shaped opening, and the sun came through. I snapped that picture. It was gone 3 minutes later, but you know, to me, it's indisputable.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Absolutely.
It's obvious, Jennifer, from knowing you and reading your books that you are a spiritual person. So your signs, you've had affirming signs from your loved ones who've passed on. Are there any others that you'd like to share? The heart one, I love that.
Oh, Linda, I have notes scribbled all over my house about the affirming signs so I don't forget. I never had a formal religious upbringing, and I sort of envied people who had a deep, structured belief system that, as an outsider, looked like it was really comforting in their grief. But the signs are what have sustained me. Boisterous, energetic, cardinal bashing on my door that had not in a spot I'd ever seen one before. Or I mentioned something similar in Comfort in the Wings, a butterfly lingering far longer than you'd ever expect. And Jason's birthday again this year, I was walking on the beach, and the biggest shell I had ever found on that beach that I've walked on for 30 years came right up at my foot at the very minute I walked by. So, yeah, they go on and on. And I guess the other thing that hasn't come up that is mentioned in the books is that in a very roundabout way, I found my way to a psychic medium shortly after Jay passed away, and having that experience of connecting with him and then later with Abby and my brother, and was something that was definitely spiritual in nature. And I know for some people that's not something that is a comfortable belief, but it was something else that made me feel very, very connected.
And I think when I look at what's happened in all of our lives sitting around this table here, the four of us, all the people that have come into our lives since, I think our loved ones on the other side have had a lot to do with that.
I think so.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this has been a wonderful discussion. And is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
I think, and this builds a little bit off of what we were saying earlier about feeling appreciative, and I really feel that one of the strategies is that I truly choose, emphasizing the word choose, every dang day to find reasons to be happy and grateful. I'm so truly blessed to run a family business with my oldest son by my side, with Andrew, and I just relish every minute of that privilege to work with him. I might wake up weepy from dreaming about Abby or be bogged down because it's one of the many lousy calendar dates that whiz on by, but I really try to let those sad feelings settle. I accept them, but then need to just find ways to keep going and celebrate my kids who are not here, my kids who are here, and the joy will creep back in. And I just hope that the joy creeps into the books as well.
Yeah.
Well, they're uplifting books, for sure.
It does.
Tender.
Absolutely.
Yes, beautifully written.
And I love how you phrased it at the beginning about you had to survive. You had to survive. And I can remember, and I'm sure all of us sitting here, people saying, how do you do it? How are you doing this? And when you said that, I was like, because we had to survive. We had to survive. We had to go forward. And gratitude that you just mentioned is such a huge part of that deep appreciation and really finding your way. And you do. You do. And your books are full of that you really,
And
you can get through.
Yeah. And you said earlier, you used the word disrespectful. It would be disrespectful not to be doing what we're doing.
Yes, you have to honor them.
You have to honor that. And you know, it might be different for everybody, right? But everybody has to find their own way to honor them. It could be, you know, planting some flowers. It could be a multitude of things, but it's different for everybody, just like the grief is. But yes, finding a way to honor, a special way to honor the people we are missing. Yeah, absolutely.
And that really is what it's about, is finding that special way to honor them, whatever that may be.
I think so.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This is a conversation that needs to happen. It needs to continue. We invite more, all of you, to embrace the conversations about grief and remembering our loved ones and knowing that you can get to the other side. This has been wonderful.
I appreciate having the chance to have yet another conversation and honor all of our children.
Well, I'm so glad that we saw your talk at Cobblestone Arts Center 2 years ago, because it's inspired a beautiful friendship and a very special friendship. And so thank you for your books. Thank you for your example. And thank you for being you and honoring your children in such a special way.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is wonderful, wonderful conversation today. Wonderful.
Thank you, listeners. Our daughters and you are the reason we do this podcast. And a warm thank you to Rockvox Recording and Production and Scott Fitzgerald, sound engineer extraordinaire. He expertly produces our podcast and so much more.
Help us continue the conversations. Please rate, review, share, and subscribe to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces on the podcast you are listening to us on. Tell your family and friends about us, and check out the show notes to learn more about Jennifer Collins and the Words in the Wings Press, Jack, Linda, and their book, Emily, the Story of a Girl and Her Family Hijacked by Anorexia, and their nonprofit, the Emily Connection.
And learn more about our wonderful friend and co-host, Ellen Bennett, and her nonprofit, K&B for Answers, in memory of her daughter, Katie. And please remember how important these conversations are, because everybody knows somebody with a mental illness, and everybody's mental health matters. And as always, if you're looking for a place to record your podcast, record your audiobook, or do a legacy cast for your loved ones, Rockvox Recording and Production Studio is the only place to do that. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.